like to begin, if we might, on Ukraine. The battle lines have been drawn, they're hardened. We're now 2.5 years into this war. How do you see this war ending?
How do you see the war is ending? I'm not sure I'll be able to answer that question because I have never watched a war where you can predict the end game or the conclusion. But I know that from a European perspective, from an American perspective, and even from a global perspective, I think the result of all this is that we cannot let Russia win a war, and we cannot let Russia define the borders by an extremely aggressive war in Europe. Because if we let them do that, then all what we have tried to build since the end of the Second World War will be damaged. So that is my conclusion. And I think we need a shift now in the war to ensure not only that Ukraine will not lose this war, but to ensure that Ukraine will actually win this war.
Well, then what will determine that? What will make that? Can you guarantee that? Because it seems like the amount of force, military gear, manpower, all these sorts of things would be tremendously large to expel Russia. So I'm just trying to understand how you think about that problem.
Well, you're probably right. It will demand a lot, like it has been the case now for 2.5 years. I don't think, let me start another place. You can only have peace if you have two partners in a war who actually wants peace. Ukraine wants peace. I have visited the country several times. I know the Ukrainians are quite good now. They only have one wish, and that is peace and prosperity for their people. That's not the case with Russia. There's only one part who have started this war. There's only one aggressive part, and that is Russia. And I don't think you can have a peaceful solution when the one country that has been attacked wants peace, and the aggressive part wants the war to continue. And therefore, we have to be able to give the right answer, and it has to be powerful, unfortunately, because I would prefer peaceful time instead of wartime in Europe. My suggestion is let us end the discussion about red lines.
Okay.
And let us not delay what the Ukrainian needs, not only to protect themselves but also to push Russia back.
So on the question of whether or not Ukraine should be allowed without restriction to strike within Russia with donated gear, where do you stand?
It has, of course, to be according to international law, but from a Danish perspective, we are not working with restrictions. And I think it has been a mistake during this war to have a public discussion about red lines. For me, it is, the meaning of this public discussion about red lines and restrictions are simply giving the Russians too good card on their hands. Yeah. So, of course, Ukraine needs to work according to international law, but as long as they do that, there are no restrictions from a Danish perspective.
And Putin has said that if the Ukrainians are in fact allowed to do this, that they're able to strike within Russia, that this would be escalating the conflict to a sort of potentially NATO-wide thing. Putin has said many things. Exactly. When he says that, what do you hear?
First of all, I will not accept that Putin decides what the rest of the world should do. He is the only one responsible for a war going on in Europe. He could end this war right now. Right now. From the very beginning, the Russians, including Putin, have put a lot of different things on the table, saying if you're going to do this, then you will cross a red line. But the one most important red line has been crossed already, and that was when the Russians entered Ukraine. So I will not accept this premise, and I will never allow anyone from Russia to decide what is the right thing to do in NATO, in Europe, or in Ukraine.
But of course, you're also on the doorstep, so you are potentially at higher risk, and that does not factor in for you.
No, of course not. And you cannot. If you want to tackle a war situation in Europe, you cannot work with these methods, because when I look at Russia today, and please don't talk about Putin, we have to talk about Russia.
Yeah.
When you look at the Russian behavior, not only in Ukraine, but also in the West Balkans, when you look at the behavior in the Middle East, in Africa, in the Sahel region, I see a Russia that is trying to destabilize this world with a lot of different measures. And if you look at the situation now in the rest of Europe, look at cyber attacks, look at hybrid attacks, look at disinformation. Well, Russia is working to destabilize the world order that the two of us, the only world order that we know, and therefore this thinking that if we allow him to take Ukraine or parts of Ukraine, then he will be satisfied. I disagree.
And then we have a new commission here in Europe. It is being animated in part by the spirit of the Draghi report, which, among other things, is calling for a more integrated, a more united Europe. That means a Europe, from what he says, that acts more like a single country, less like a fragmented collection of countries. Do you agree with that vision of Europe, and do you agree with his sort of analysis that it is the only way that Europe will remain economically, militarily relevant versus, say, competition with the United States and with China?
In many ways, yes. I don't look at the world, with conflicts between US and Europe.
Yeah. But for example, there are industrial conflicts we can see.
Yeah, but we should get rid of those. Yeah. I am transatlantic deep in my heart, and with all the conflicts in the world, especially also when you look at the Chinese behavior, I don't think we should have any conflicts between US and Europe. But to take a step back and look at Draghi's report, I think it's quite a good job he has done. I agree with many of the things, and Europe has to be stronger. Not only when you look at competition and our economy, but also when you look at technology and when you look at security.
And security is one of the main things that he's addressed. It's defense. It's about sort of collective procurement. He makes the point that there are 12 different tanks that are built in Europe. There's one in the United States. But it's also going to cost a lot of money. Is the question, and one of the tools to address that, of course, is a joint debt. It is a debate that's always very heated. Are you open at least to the idea or the conversation around joint debt to deal with the shortfall in European defense?
I think we have to be open-minded about everything at the moment. And that represents a change also in the Danish attitude, because we have always been, a bit frugal when it comes to the budget within the European Union. Of course, we always have to take care of and to ensure that our money is very well spent and so on. But when I look at all the challenges in front of us, I mean, on security, defense and deterrence, we have to spend much more in Europe. When I look at technology and innovation, space, quantum, AI, when I look at the green transition, and when I look at the world, I am a social democrat, so I want the solutions to be social balanced. When I look at all these things, and we have to be able to manage all of it at the same time, including migration, then we need more money, and we need to be able to invest more in our common future. And therefore, I am open-minded in all kind of discussions. And for me, the most important thing is that in this geopolitical situation, we need a strong Europe. So you have to put the conclusion before the discussions instead of the other way around.
I take your point. And would you be willing, just because I don't touch on migration, so would you be willing to help lobby some of your neighbors that are a bit harder to convince on the question of a joint debt? Are you willing to serve that function to try to make that case?
You did not hear me say, well, common debt is the only answer to...
No, but you're open to the idea, is what I'm hearing.
I am open to all kind of discussions. Right. And for me, the most important thing is how to ensure that Europe will be able to do what is needed. And then we have to find out how to reach that goal.
Right. Yeah. And on the issue of immigration, so you've stood as a sort of an anomaly to many people as a social democrat, very strict sort of immigration laws. That has been sort of atonal for some people within European politics. However, we're seeing that sort of change a little bit. We saw with Germany, of course, they now have border controls between your border, but all of their land borders. Where do you see the conversation on immigration going in Europe and evolving?
It is changing a lot, finally. Thank you, dear colleagues We should have changed the rules and the legislation in Europe a long time ago. It is actually because I am a social democrat that I'm quite tough on migration, and of course especially on irregular migration, because if too many people from outside Europe enters Europe, the problems with lack of integration will simply be too big and too massive. And that is the case in many European countries now. When you look at the crime scene, when you look at the radicalization, and lack of sustainability inside our societies. So we have to be, unfortunately, quite tough on migration. We have to be in control with our external borders. We have to be able, as leaders, to say if people come to Europe and if they commit serious crimes, then we should be able to tell them to leave Europe again and our countries. No one flees without a purpose, of course, so we have to be able to help people still. But we can help many more people if we help outside Europe. And when you ask me, is the discussion inside Europe, is it changing? Yes, it is. Maybe a bit too late, unfortunately, because the problems are extremely high in numbers now. But we still have time to change this. And for me, after Ukraine, this is target number one. I mean, it has to be really in top of our mind and our priorities.
And on a question to the approach to China, is there a sort of growing bloc within Europe that is opposing the EV tariffs that are being imposed? Do you think that could capitulate?
Well, first of all, I don't think we have ever been unfair to China when it comes to trade. I think us Europeans are always trying to play by the rules, but when I'm listening to the Commission, it seems that we are now facing some problems with unfair competition from China, and we have to react on that. But it's not because we don't want a fair competition. It's not because we want tariffs. But of course, if someone is acting unfair, then we have to react on it.
But there's some resistance to that. Do you hear that within Europe? Because you think that, I mean, are you in favor, for one, of the EV tariffs?
I am in favor of a European reaction if partners globally do not play by the rules.
Okay. And you've, I imagine, been watching candidate Harris in the United States. What do you imagine a relationship with a President Harris to be like?
Well, I have been working with President Trump when he was in office. I know Kamala Harris from discussions where I have been able to meet with her. And I'm pretty sure that I will have a good relationship with both of them. The elections in the US is a matter for the Americans.
Sure.
And as I said, I am transatlantic by heart. And I will never accept anything bad between US and Europe. I agree when US presidents have said to us Europeans that we have to be able to do more on our own when it comes to security. And I look forward to whoever I'm going to work with in the future.
And can you set the record straight? Is Greenland still not for sale then?
We have had that discussion already, and I don't think there's any good reasons to enter that again.
Okay, you're also in this sort of enviable position of having a country, a small country that has generated a lot of market-leading companies, also potentially in the unenviable position of having generated one so large that is now bigger than the Danish economy in Novo Nordisk. How do you balance that risk so that when the tide goes up, it lifts the Danish economy, when it comes down, it doesn't wash it out?
Well, first of all, I am extremely proud that we have big now global companies coming from Denmark. I don't see a lot of risks with even the size of some of the companies, because we have a very strong economy also in other sectors. But we have, of course, to watch it, but no, I'm not really worried about it.
And then on that question, you also, with all of these companies here in Denmark, you also have an exceedingly tight labor market in the sense that you need more workers to skilled workers to deal with the demand that these companies have for workers. How do you balance your immigration policy with that need within the economy?
Well, first of all, I think, when the economy is in such a good shape as it is for the moment in Denmark, and that has been the case for quite a long time now, you always have to be, willing to open the doors also for Danes who traditionally have been outside the labor market. I still believe that we have some youngsters who do not participate in education or the labor market. I want them to join. We still have some disabled people who is outside our labor market whom I want to join. And of course, the labor force from other countries are welcomed in Denmark. We have quite a high number already. I think it is a possibility. We are able to balance being tough on irregular migration and at the same time, of course, have an open society. And as you probably know, a lot of foreigners are now living in Denmark, including a lot of US citizens.
And just in closing, casting your mind forward to a few days from now, we're imagining you're leaving the UN General Assembly. What would you like to have achieved there? What would you like to leave New York with?
Oh, a couple of things. That meeting is important because the whole world is gathering in US. So we have the possibility to, during those days, to have discussions also with our global partners. I want a Europe that has stronger partnerships with African colleagues and friends and Latin American countries, Asian countries, and so on. So I think that is the most important thing, to have a global community. And then, of course, secondly, the war in Ukraine is on top of my agenda because this is not. That's also something I would like to say to some of our friends and colleagues outside Europe and US. This is not a matter for US and Europe because what we see now is a Russia that is getting closer to North Korea and to Iran. And I don't think that Russia would be able to have a full-scale war inside Europe without help from China, unfortunately. So this is not a European conflict. This is a global conflict, and the consequences have been extremely high for all of us, unfortunately.